When you look at me, what color do you see? I ask that because when I was younger, I thought I was cursed. I thought I was cursed because of my dark chocolate skin. People would look at me strange and they would make comments. And for years, I was teased and bullied and just made fun of just because of the color of my skin. I thought it was strange that they would make fun of me because they always called me black. I was always the black joke. I was always the butt of the black jokes. I was the black Sambo, the creature from the Black Lagoon. In my neighborhood, there were several Sheilas. I was known as the Black Sheila. I always wondered how a person could just not like you and you've done nothing to them. And it was because they didn't like the house, the physical house that I was born in. But I couldn't do anything about that. I couldn't stop them from making jokes, which I laughed at with them, right along with them on a regular basis because I didn't want them to know that they were hurting my feelings. That would have just made it worse. They would have made a bigger joke. I didn't want people to look at me and judge me or be pitying me. That wouldn't work. I used to wonder and ask God, why would you put me in a body with this color skin if you knew that people were going to just not like me? I didn't understand it. Years later, as I got older, I realized that people didn't like me not just because of the color of my skin, although that was a big part of it because colorism in the 50s and the 60s was absolutely a real thing. The darker you were, the more problems you had, and that was just a fact of life. But that wasn't one of the reasons that I think people didn't like me. Perhaps they didn't not dislike me. Perhaps that's the way I perceived it. Maybe it's the way that they looked at me that made me feel uncomfortable, and I took it that they were judging my skin. They could have been thinking I was pretty. Years later, I realized that part of my problem was that I came from a family that was different from the families in the community. Most of the families in my community did not have a mom and a dad in the house. Most of the families in my neighborhood did not have their own house. We lived in a two-story house with one family. And my dad was a very hard-working man. See, my dad dropped out of school when he was in high school because he got a girl pregnant. And in my family, if you got a girl pregnant, you got a job and you took care of your family, no questions asked. Unfortunately, a year after my brother was born, my brother's mother passed. My dad had already been dating my mom before, so he went back to her. They got married, and two became Sheila and the other 5 children. My dad was one heck of a person. He worked hard, and he decided one day he was going to start his own business. My mom, who was a seamstress, sewed for the stores around the corner on the west side of Chicago. She decided she was going to help them, and together they helped him build his studio, Levon Studios. Anybody from the west side of Chicago knows Levon Studios. They were at every school. They were on every mantle in the neighborhood. Every person in the community in that particular part of the west side knew who my dad was. He had made a name for himself. But my mom was adamant about moving out of the community. My dad said he did not want to move out of the community because if he moved out of the community, he would be just like every other successful black person in the community. He said every time a black man or a black family gets ahead, they uproot, move out to the suburbs, and the people in the west side or the people in the community never get to see what success looks like. He wanted to be an example. My mom was furious, but she was helping him do what it was that he wanted to do. They stayed on the west side of Chicago. Later, my mom came home one day and she said, you know, God told me to open a church. My dad was furious. You have to picture this. We were in the Church of God in Christ, which meant in that church, no women were ever to be in a position to tell a man what to do. They could not be a preacher. My dad said, I'm not going to have no preacher woman. My mom said, but God told me to. He said, if you go in and get a church, I'm going to leave you. My mom cried and cried for a couple of weeks. I mean, she was really torn up about it, and the house was quiet because nobody knew what to say to this. Were you going to be on daddy's side and say, well, mama shouldn't get a church? Or are you going to be on mama's side and say, well, she shouldn't listen to God? We didn't have anything to say. One day, my dad was with one of his friends. He was a marshal, and he could carry a gun. He had just purchased a new gun. And he took the gun out in front of one of his friends one day. He was trying to explain this new gun to him and show how, all the good things going on with this gun. And he emptied out all the bullets, and he held the gun up at the guy. And the guy said, no, man, put the gun down. He said, no, it's empty. I emptied all the bullets. He said, look. And he pulled the trigger, and the gun said, bam. And Daddy said, God said to him as soon as his ears start ringing, if you don't leave her alone, I will kill you. Needless to say, Daddy joined Mama in the church, and they both became pastors of Faith Tabernacle Church on the west side of Chicago in this little bitty hole next door to a liquor store. That ideal that my father had, it was a great idea, but he didn't take into the account that something could happen. I want to take some time to tell you about my sister. There were only two of us in my family, 2 girls, 4 boys. And my sister was my best friend. She was one of the most beautiful young women you'd ever want to see. And more than the outside beauty, she had a glow about her. Her spirit would encompass any room when she walked in. One day, my sister and I was in our living room. We were practicing. They were getting ready to have a talent show at the school. And my sister had made a bet with me that if I didn't do something, she was going to, if she didn't win the bet, then I didn't have to do the talent show. But if I won the bet, she would have to leave me alone. Of course, she won the bet. She had it fixed. Somehow she knew that I was going to lose this bet. And we got to singing and practicing for this talent show. And she said, let's get this song together. She was trying to convince me because I was so shy. I didn't want to sing. But she was like, I can't do this without you. I got to have you with me. So she said, let's do this show. And we were rehearsing in the living room, singing this song that we had made up just for this particular event. The song was, if you need a friend, he'll be right there standing by. He'll be your friend, your helping hand. He'll comfort you, he'll see you through, no matter what you're going through. Your helping hand. As we finished the song, she stopped. And we sat there in the still of the room. And I could still hear the clock ticking in the background. And it was so quiet, but it was something about that moment. She was looking at me, and I was looking at her so intently. And she said, you know what? That song could be about friends. I said, what? She said, that's how I feel about you. I was like, oh, that's how I feel about you too. I love you. And we hugged, did this little sister thing. Later, it had to be maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2. I was walking up the steps, and I was drying my hair, and I heard a gunshot. And I stopped literally on the step, and I said a prayer, because that's what we did on the west side. When you hear gunshots, you don't know whose family is going to touch the next time. You just start praying that no one really got shot. few minutes later, somebody came to the door, bam, 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 on the door. And I heard somebody talking really fast. I couldn't hear what they were saying. But I heard my mother go, "Oh no, my baby, my baby." And my dad was saying, "Where is she? Where is she?" And he was trying to catch my mother, because my mother, by the way, was 7 months pregnant with my little sister. I don't remember what happened from the time that they told us that and when we went to the hospital. The next thing I remember consciously was that I was standing at the bed and I was looking down at my sister, and she just looked asleep. And she had her head wrapped with gauze, and I could hear the beeping in the back of the heart monitor going. And I could hear the doctors just outside the door talking to my parents, explaining that my sister had gotten shot in the head and the bullet had gone into her brain, and that she was brain dead, and that they wanted them to make the decision. I remember making so many promises to God, standing there. I remember telling her, trying to con her into waking up, telling her I still didn't get a chance to give her gift. I was like, "I haven't given you my gift. I haven't given you my gift." But she laid there so still. My parents didn't have to make the decision, because after a little while, you could hear the beeping stop, and you can hear that silent tone. I tell you this story because I need you to understand what violence does, not just to the persons whose life you've affected, but to the family that's affected. That one bullet destroyed my family. I mean, literally, we have never been the same. Years later, I asked God, I said, "Lord, what can I do?" Because I was numb for a long time. I couldn't even process, but when I did, I asked God, what can I do? What can Sheila do to help stop this senseless violence? What can I do to help people understand that when you hurt one, you hurt a whole community? One day, while I was cooking breakfast, I heard on the radio an advertisement, and it was for the Miss Black Chicago pageant. I said, "Oh, that's one strike for me. I'm Black." They said, "If you get a chance to become one of the 7 finalists, you will get a chance to do your talent on television." Oh, I had to try that. As shy as I was, I had to try it. I knew that if I put on enough makeup, I could make myself look somewhat beautiful. And I knew my talent would stand on its own. So I went and I applied to get in the pageant. And although I got accepted in, I'll never forget the first day the owner came and looked at me. We were all sitting on the floor, and she was walking by and looking, and she got to me. And I remember that look, how I had seen it so many times in my life. It was "You don't belong here. You're not what we consider pretty." I got to the end, and I didn't have my hair done because she had sent me somewhere else while everyone was getting their hair done. And I ended up having to pull my hair back, and I started crying. I'm like, "God, I am not going to be able to do anything with this looking like this." And God said, "Do you want it?" And I said, I really was just trying to be one of the 7 finalists, and I made the 7 finalists. But he said, "But do you want it?" I said, "That would be kind of nice." Needless to say, Miss Black Chicago 1981, Sheila Edwards. So years later, my son was getting ready to go to college, and he came to me with this bracelet, and he said, "Mom, fix my bracelet." I'm like, "Why?" "Mom, it glows in the dark. I really like this bracelet." And I remember thinking to myself, wow, if he is that excited about a bracelet that doesn't do anything, what if that bracelet had a meaning? What if it stood for something that would make him remember who he was supposed to be as a person? That day, Born to be Light was born. I decided that when I got home, I was going to start a company, and it was going to be a nonprofit. And I want to share with you today that it's very important that you take total control over what you decide you want to be. My sister had the brightest light ever. And when you looked at her, when people met her, they met a person full of life and vitality, and she brought positivity into every situation. I decided that's what I was going to do. And I am going to challenge you today to look at the person next to you and ask yourself, what kind of light are you? Are you one that's going to walk in the room and cause everybody to whisper because you're going to be spreading rumors? Are you the one that's going to sit on a job and say, I'm not going to do that because that's not my job? And so you got a light, but you're kind of holding it like a candle when you can do so much more? Are you the kind of light that always find a reason to be upset and to bring just all type of dysfunction into a situation, dysfunction into a situation? Or are you that light that when you walk in the room, people are happy to see you? They're just glad you're in their presence. Are you that one that's going to walk into a situation that's having a hard time or an argument, and you're going to say, wait a minute, let's talk about it. You're going to be the solution and not the problem. Are you going to be a light that when you see a crowd running to do something that you know is not quite right, you're going to run in the other direction because you don't want your light associated with that? I challenge you today to look in the mirror and ask yourself, what color do I see?